Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our Manhattan Forum on the Path to Ranked Choice Voting, the third event in a 5-part series bringing together policymakers, leaders from government, advocacy professionals, academics, and the media, of course. I'm Zach Williams, staff reporter at City and State. I'll be emceeing today. Before we jump right into our event, I would like to thank our great sponsor, Spectrum, for helping us put on this great event. It's an exciting time. This is the first year that the city is using ranked choice voting, which is already changing how candidates campaign for elective office across the city. We got a diverse group of experts to unpack how ranked choice voting works and what it means going forward as the 2021 mayoral race heats up. But before we get to those insights, Rodney Capel, Vice President of State Government Affairs at Charter Communications, has a few things to say to help set the mood. Oh, we got you you're muted, Rodney.
Trying to be a good neighbor and not be loud. But thanks again, Zach. Thank you so much for all of your work, your team's work to making and bringing this together. I also want to thank the tremendous panel who have come on to assist us in educating voters about the importance of this election and about the changes that are happening in terms of how you vote. And to our mayoral candidates who are on that never-ending Zoom parade, we thank you for the time you've spent today to share just a few moments of your ideas about this as well. Again, my name is Rodney Capel. I'm the Vice President for Government Affairs here at Charter Communications, better known as Spectrum. And we're honored to sponsor this event. Charter makes information available to all its customers through its internet, cable TV programming, and through its news station that we all love, New York One. Charter plays an essential role ensuring that all New Yorkers are aware of the latest news impacting their city. And this is one of those really important issues that we want to make sure got out to the public about in 2021, which is ranked choice voting. Probably the average New Yorker is not too familiar with this issue, but consistent with our role as an information provider, we felt important to sponsor these forums with City and State so that New Yorkers are aware of the new voting procedures. And it was my honor to be able to do it in my home borough of Manhattan as a Harlem child growing up, going with my father, Jim Capel, to a polling site. One of the great joys I had as a child was going into that voting booth and being able to vote for the next leaders of our community. Being able to take my now 7-year-old son, I want to make sure that I know how to properly vote in those elections so that he, when he gets older, is clear in understanding those issues. So I'm looking forward to a very robust opportunity to discuss these issues, and we hope that you all get something out of it as we go into the June elections. Thanks again, Zach.
Thanks so much, Rodney. That was great. Now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who has reported enough about ranked choice voting to become one of the few reporters who really understands how it all works and what it means for the 2021 Democratic primary for mayor. My colleague at City and State, Rebecca Lewis.
Thank you for that introduction, Zach. Ranked choice voting is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'm so glad that that City and State and Spectrum are hosting these events in every borough. It's so important that we make sure that everyone knows about the new voting system, how it works, and how they can best engage with it. So we're starting off today with 2 brief interviews, Q&As, with some mayoral candidates. We're starting off first with Maya Wiley, who is the former counsel to the mayor and a civil rights activist. Thanks for joining us today, Maya.
Great to be with you, Rebecca.
So I want to start by asking, you have long been a staunch supporter of ranked choice voting. You spoke out a lot about it when it was on the ballot, and you've since continued to advocate for it. I'm curious what your thoughts are now with how the rollout is going.
I not only supported it, I co-chaired the coalition to bring it. I'm a staunch supporter, that's right. And look, I think the Bureau of Elections has done a deep disservice to voters in this city, because the important thing about ranked choice voting is it helps us all have more of a voice. We don't have to come back to the polls if there's a runoff, which so many New Yorkers can't afford to give up the pay, maybe don't have someone to take care of an elderly family member or a child. So this increases our voice, but it does require public education. That is critically important. And I'm just been disturbed at how long it's been taking to have a good full rollout of public education, but we as a campaign are doing everything in our power to get the word out.
So in your capacity as a candidate, what are you encountering on the campaign trail, and what are you doing to make sure that voters know about it?
Well, I think the first is to make sure voters know about it, because as you can imagine, Rebecca, not all voters do. A lot of voters are just starting to turn their attention to the race for reasons we all understand, given COVID and the trauma that is COVID, also an historic presidential election, and also an insurrection in DC. But the attention is turning. So in a lot of instances, we're finding that voters did not know that there was ranked choice voting. So that's part of it. And for those who do know, they have a lot of questions and just want to understand, what's the ballot gonna look like? And so we find ourselves sharing the basic mechanics of how it works.
And how often do you encounter people who do know about it when you're out on the campaign trail?
It varies a lot. As you can imagine, some folks are very engaged. Some folks are just really busy and bone crushed, just trying to survive this pandemic that is COVID, based on both hunger that's increased 250%. As you know, we have some communities really hard hit by very high levels of joblessness. Folks are stressed about possible eviction. So it really does vary widely depending on who we're talking to and how engaged they've been able to be. And a lot of that is about their conditions and whether they're struggling to survive.
As a supporter yourself, who, as you said, we're on the committee to help get this in the city, is there enough time to make sure that all the voters are informed enough that they're not going to the poll sites, blind about this issue?
Look, there is enough time if we all do the work, and if the Bureau of Elections gets itself together and really does a great job of getting that education done. We've got lots of community partners. We have a huge volume of people, as we saw, that stepped up when we did Census 2020, and just remember how difficult the conditions were for getting folks to fill out the census form. And yet we made history. But the reason we did was because there was a lot of investment into community-based organizations and leaders to do that public education. I'm looking at Hazel Dukes at the NAACP. We got branches all across this city. We've got all kinds of community-based organizations that I know are working hard and care a lot about whether our people get the information they need. And senior centers. Senior centers are a critically important place and a particularly important demographic to focus on. So we have time if we have will.
How do you expect ranked choice voting will impact your campaign, for you personally, and the way how you campaign, how you interact with other candidates? I know it's still a little early on in the race, so maybe we haven't seen knives out yet. But it's one of the what proponents say, like yourself, it leads to a different kind of campaigning. I'm curious how you expect it might change your calculus.
Well, it hasn't changed my calculus in the slightest. I'm focused on every voter. I always have, I always will. I'm not a politician. I'm an advocate and an activist. And for me, it's always been about people. So it's always been about everyone. So in that sense, it hasn't changed a thing. I'm going to go after every vote. What I think is important about it is I do think it creates the conditions to have us all focused on the issues and not on tearing down each other. And that's not something that I do. I will disagree in a heartbeat with anyone I don't agree with on the substance or on the principles, but not on the person. There are wonderful people running for office, and I don't shy away from telling them they're wonderful. There are folks I don't agree with. I don't shy away from disagreeing when I do. And so I think that that's, the way that our politics should be, because it should keep people front and center.
And, just lastly, we've seen some co-campaigning in other cities that have enacted ranked choice voting. Have you given that any thought about who you might co-endorse and run with as a first and second choice?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is the kind of question that ranked choice voting invites. I mean, quite frankly, we've been very focused on just, meeting with people, building our platform. We've been doing it in a very collaborative way. We've been having people's assemblies, and I hope people come. mywileyformayor.com. Come to a people's assembly, because you don't have to support me to participate in saying what the priorities are, what the problems are, what the ideas and pathways forward are. And that's a lot of where our focus has been. And certainly that may change, but right now we're just focused on people, focused on problems, focused on priorities, and focused on problem solving.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of what I'm sure is a very busy Zoom schedule. 4 to 5 forums a day. It's very hectic, I imagine. So thank you so much for taking some time to chat about ranked choice voting with us today.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for your coverage on it. It really means a lot.
Next, we will have our second mayoral candidate of this event, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. Thank you so much for joining us in this event today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So you are someone who originally came out in support of ranked choice voting, but at the end of last year, you expressed some concerns and reservations. Can you tell me about what changed for you?
Actually, I was consistent. When I announced my support for ranked choice voting, I was extremely clear that it comes with the understanding that we are going to educate voters. We can't use new systems to disenfranchise voters. Yet, after the announcement was made, there was no real initiative put in place to educate voters on this new system. And particularly when you think about senior voters, voters where English is a second language, we had an opportunity to use those who were part of the census outreach to educate voters on this initiative. And so the Department of the Board of Election, I should say, simply sending out postcards, that is just not good enough for a major change in our voting system.
If there was an adequate amount of education before June, is it a system that you think will ultimately benefit, hurt, or I guess ultimately be neutral for Black and Brown communities? I know that, as I said before with Maya, that it's one of the things that proponents have said, that it helps elevate the voices. I'm just curious if there's enough education, if you think it will ultimately be a good thing.
Yes, that's why I stood with both the Common Cause and the other elected officials. It gives an opportunity for candidates to speak with a cross-section of voters, and it allows voters to rank who they want in a particular lineage of the importance that they felt the candidates actually expressed. But we're now faced with an election process that's 4 months away in the heat of COVID-19, and we have not put in place a real initiative to educate the voters. I heard of one of the sponsors of this program, Rodney, say that many people don't know what ranked choice voting is. And that is just not a good look for one of the most important mayoral races and city council races, as well as local citywide races. That's just not acceptable. And I identify that as disenfranchisement.
Would you like to see a postponement if it's possible, or is this something that you accept as unavoidable at this point? What with the lawsuit that was brought effectively being dead in its tracks, and having 2 elections that have already happened with ranked choice voting, do you still want to see a postponement, or are you working in your capacity to make sure that every person that you come in contact with on the campaign trail at least has heard about ranked choice voting?
Yes, my goal is to make sure every New Yorker is aware of it, but we have 8 million people in this city. I'm not going to communicate with 8 million people. It's the job of government when we make major changes like this, is not to make these changes based on those who are social media savvy or those who speak English well. It is to make these changes that it will impact every New Yorker. 47% of Brooklynites speak a language other than English at home. We are continuously seeing the failure of understanding this is not an English only speaking city. That is what happened with COVID-19. Many people didn't receive the basic information because we only did it in English. We now must get in full stride to make sure we use the resources to notify those who I call credible messengers, faith-based institution, local community-based organizations, again, those who played the role in the census outreach. This is the time to get in full gear. It is crucial that we have all New Yorkers have the basic understanding of how their ballots won't be voided, how to go about carrying out the ranked choice voting process. And this, just looking at someone like my mother, she's 85 years old. She has been voting the same way. She's not on Twitter. She only understands when she walks inside that polling place how to go about casting the vote. And there are many people like my mom who really, they are the foundation of who votes every year in this city.
Well, we are about to run out of time, so I wanted to pose the same question to you that I did to Maya. We've seen co-campaigning in other cities that have had ranked choice voting, and I'm wondering if you've given any thought to it yourself, or who you might endorse as a second or third choice among your fellow candidates.
I have a good relationship with all the candidates. I believe that everyone is bringing great ideas, and I take my hat off to those who are running to be the mayor during these difficult times. As the campaign goes on, I will listen more and learn more about what they stand for, and I'm sure that we will find an alignment with some of the candidates. And if we do, we'll do a co-endorsement. If not, there's only going to be one mayor. And this is not really something that you could choose a co-mayor. It's about who has the right message for the city. At this time, I believe I do.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule for you to chat with us today about ranked choice voting.
Thank you. Take care.
We're now going to move on into the main event, the panel, with to talk about ranked choice voting, education, answer whatever questions that might be out there. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists, who I see are slowly populating the screen. We have Sean Duger, who is the Rank the Vote NYC Education Campaign Director, Assemblymember Carmen De La Rosa, Hazel Dukes, who is the president of the NAACP New York State Conference, and Alan Roscoff, who is president of the Jim Owls Liberal Democratic Club. And I realize I did not forget, he's not on the screen yet, State Senator Brian Benjamin, who will be joining us shortly, I presume, as soon as his video is on. We're going to start off today very briefly. Sean has a presentation, a visual presentation of how ranked choice voting works. And he is going to share his screen and just give us a very quick run through of the basics of what we all need to know about this new voting system. So Sean, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screen and walk us through the process.
Awesome. So you all, in the chat, there's a link to a mock election that we're running this month for which historic Black leader would you like to see on the $100 bill. So we're going to go through the results that voters who have voted in this process so far. So as you'll see, we've had 184 people participate in this mock election. And under ranked choice voting, you need 50%, at least 50% plus one of the vote in order to win. So in this case, that would be a total of 93 votes. We see that no candidate reached that threshold amongst first choice votes. So we see Shirley Chisholm in the lead with 42 votes, Martin Luther King with 31, Frederick Douglass with 26, John Lewis with 21, Malcolm X with 16, Ida B. Wells and Rosa Parks both tied with 15 votes, Maya Angelou with 10, and Bayard Rustin with 8. So again, under ranked choice voting, if no candidate receives 50% plus one of first choice votes, then we go into the ranking process. So always the candidate with the least number of votes is eliminated first. In this case, that's Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin has 8 votes. So his 8 votes, those people who voted for him would then have their second choice come into play. So we see Bayard Rustin eliminated. Come on. And we see that Shirley Chisholm and Frederick Douglass picked up the majority of his second choice votes. We continue this process. So the next lowest vote getter is Maya Angelou with 10 votes. And so her 10 voters would then have their second votes, their second choices come into play. And we see Shirley Chisholm and Rosa Parks both pick up votes there. So Ida B. Wells and Rosa Parks are still tied. So next would be what we call a batch elimination. That means that the 2 of them, because it's statistically impossible for them to hit that 50% plus 1 threshold, are eliminated at the same time, and their votes are redistributed to whoever their voters chose as their next choice. So we see overwhelmingly the votes from Ida B. Wells and Maya Angelou Ida B. Wells and Rosa Parks went to Shirley Chisholm. We continue this process until someone eventually receives 50% plus 1 of the vote. And so here we see Shirley Chisholm not only meeting and beating that 93 vote threshold to get the 50% plus 1, but overwhelmingly winning. Just one last thing that I'll point out, there are 184 voters in this election. Only 6 of them did not include either Martin Luther King or Shirley Chisholm on their ballot. That means only 6 voters out of 184 didn't have a say in the final process. Thank you.
Before we move on, Sean, if you could just briefly explain, the concept of exhausted votes, only because it is something that has been brought up. I know it's a little bit technical. There is concern that if your vote is exhausted, that means that your vote isn't part of the final tally. Can you just, just briefly explain what that means to be an exhausted vote, and why it's not? I suppose just alleviate perhaps some concerns that people might have about, having their ballot becoming exhausted.
Definitely. So I'll start out by saying under the previous system of elections, plurality elections, that meant a candidate, a city council member maybe, could be elected with as little as 20% of the vote. That means that 80% of voters voted for someone else and didn't have a say in the final election results. As we just saw in the simulation that I ran in the mock election, out of 184 voters, only 6 didn't have a say in the final process, in the final results. So an exhausted vote is where all the candidates that you've included on your ballot have been eliminated from the race. They've lost the race. Nationally, we see on average that rate at about 10% in ranked choice elections, compared to 80% of voters in a plurality who didn't vote for the winning candidate.
So it just basically means that you happen not to have chosen one of the 2 candidates, but your votes still were part of this ranking process.
Definitely, yes.
Well, thank you for explaining that. I know it might be a little bit technical, but since you brought it up, I think it's an important aspect that people really understand how it works. So to start off the discussion, I want to bring in the rest of our panelists, and I want to hear from each of you about what you're hearing from your communities about ranked choice voting, whether it's people aren't familiar with it, whether people are excited about it, if they're really big civic nerds. Education is obviously a very important aspect of this. So, I'm curious what each of you have been hearing from your communities about, what needs to be done to make sure that people know what's happening in June.
Let me start off if I can, because I have to leave. Rebecca, thank you, and City and State and Spectrum, my dear friend Rodney Capel. As I said yesterday, and Alan, my good friend, many years, so I am a nerd, a political nerd. Think this is awful. I think it's almost like voter suppression in my community, in the African-American community. And I'm hearing it daily. We've had branches, Queens, Brooklyn, Mid-Manhattan branch. There's 15 branches within the 5 boroughs of the city of New York. And they're not getting it. And I'm not getting it. I mean, I've been in politics. I've served as national, Democratic National Committee. I've done campaigns from Jimmy Carter up to Biden, Senator Benjamin campaign, Charlie Rangel campaign, Percy Sutton campaign. And all of a sudden, here we talking about ranked choice voting. We start talking about it in 2019. I voted against it. We took a position against it in the Amsterdam News, telling our people don't vote for it, because we see it as not really asking you for participation. As Maya said, they said they was going to educate the community. You're just doing it, and people are fatigued with Zooning right now. They really are. So they're not paying attention. And all the other problems that was laid out that we're having, hunger, people been at home with 3 and 4 children with no device for them to even do their homework. Many problems. I think the voters have spoken, as Alan said, but we ought to delay this. This is an important election, the mayor of the city of New York. We ought to have participation from every spectrum, every area of this city for the problems we have before us. You name them and we have them. Health, education, employment, all of this is before people. And to try to tell people now to go in and do, when I talk to people, they said, oh no, I'm not getting into that foolishness. I'm just gonna vote for one person that I like, person that comes from our community. They know us. They are not into this ranked choice voting. Someone should listen and hear. It is not going to be the kind of participation that we want. Sean and I spoke in 2019. He know where I was standing then as the president of NAACP. And I think I'm political intelligent. I have been campaign manager for campaigns, but this is not getting it into my community.
Oh, I certainly, I definitely want to follow up on that. And I want to make it clear to all of our viewers from a technical standpoint that it is perfectly acceptable to vote for only one person in ranked choice voting. It doesn't mean that your ballot's going to be thrown out. It doesn't mean that your ballot isn't valid. It simply means that your vote won't go quite as far as other people's vote, in that it won't be redistributed to any other candidate. So certainly there should be no concern that voting for only one candidate is wrong. And it's a perfectly valid way to still vote, even if you only want to vote for one candidate. But Hazel, I want to follow up, obviously you have, grave concerns. What do you think should be done right now? What should we be doing right now? The city, community groups, lawmakers, candidates, anyone who's going to be involved with this. What do you want to see happening to make sure that people at least know about this, even if they're not particularly, even if they choose not to engage with it completely?
People now want to know if their children went back to school. They want to hear a candidate, imagine education. They want to know jobs coming back. They want to know if they're going to get the vaccine. I've been working as a social worker for the last 2 weeks, trying to get people a vaccine after I went out as a trusted leader to tell them to go take the vaccine. And then when I convinced them to take the vaccine, we didn't have the vaccine. I mean, these are the everyday living. I think the candidates got to speak to those issues. That should not be their topic. Ranked choice voting. Do they go turn people who are hurting off? So they are caught in this foul well too. That people are not thinking about. They're thinking about going into the ballot, voting for the man or woman who say, look, I'm going to make sure your children get back to school. We're going to change this curriculum. Every child is going to have quality education. We're going to have healthcare centers where we won't have this disparity any longer. We're going to get you out of the house. You've been in there for a year. We're going to get people back. We're going to get you back to work. That's what people want to hear now. They ranked choice voting. If I had to, Sean told us 189 people. If I got 10 people to answer questions, and then when I got the ranked choice voting, they said, what is that? I'm not concerned about that. That's where we are now in the history of America. The people in Atlanta said, we're going to go to Washington and we're going to get vaccine and we're going to get a stimulus package for you. That was their message. It was nothing about anything but where people needs have to be, where we're meeting people needs. And so the education part is too late. We're talking about June. And people now are talking about, how can I get my vaccine? And when is my children going back to school? It's going to be safe for it to go back to school. Those are the topics that is in my community. Now, Senator Brian Benjamin is my senator. He knows because I'm on him all the time, making him get city and state in here to get us vaccine, to get us testing. Those are the issues that he's been dealing with. That's
I want to open this up to the rest of the panelists as well. These are all very
absolutely
very valid and very valid concerns and certainly very big issues. But very briefly, before I do, I just wanted to knock off a couple of technical questions that I've seen pop up. The voting didn't the vote reallocation did not stop. And Sean, you can jump in if you feel the need to. Did not stop because in New York City, the process continues until there are only 2 candidates. But as soon as someone hits 50%, they are the winner. It's just a matter of by how much. So in New York City, it keeps going until there are 2 candidates left. Let's say someone wins with 51%. It keeps going. So maybe in the end, they win with 63%. It's a greater, the votes go farther, in other words.
And just to clarify, you're a winner once you hit 50% plus 1 vote. Not just 50%.
Yeah, 50 plus 1. If someone gets 50%, technically, they are not the winner yet. Just briefly, for anyone who might not have been paying attention in 2019, ranked choice voting was passed through a charter amendment in 2019 by the will of the voters by about 75% of the by about 75% in 2019, and I believe there is one other question, whether you can rank the same person 3 times. There's technically nothing wrong with that, but your vote would only count once for that person. Your vote won't be thrown out. It just means that you voted for one person and your vote will count for that one person. So those are just a couple of quick technical things. And one last thing, because I believe I also saw a question about what this means for federal elections. Ranked choice voting will only apply to primary elections and special elections in New York City municipal elections. So that's city council, that's mayor, that's borough president, comptroller, and public advocate. Those are the races, primary and special elections. So state elections are still plurality, federal elections are still plurality. Only city elections will be ranked choice. So I saw a couple of questions pop up about that. Wanted to make sure that everyone who's tuned in is, on the same same page. But to go back to the question of education, Senator Benjamin, I want to open it up to you, as since Hazel, said that, kind of name checked you as her senator, about what you're hearing from your community and what kind of outreach that you are engaging in or trying to engage in to make sure that people are educated so that they can be the most informed that they can be when they go to exercise their right to vote.
First of all, thank you, Rebecca. I want to thank City and State, my co-panelists for being here, Alan, Ma Dukes, and Carmen. You know what? The issue that I have, Rebecca, and one of the things that I think Borough President Eric Adams was discussing earlier is, there's an asymmetry of information. And so, for example, as you mentioned earlier, it is okay if someone just goes and votes for one person, but it is also the case that under this system that they're now disenfranchised vis-a-vis other voters who vote for multiple people. And I think it's important that given where we are, there absolutely has to be, remember, when we passed ranked choice voting, it was stated that there'll be a year worth of education to really get people up to speed. Then the issue became, well, we can't do it before the presidential election because we didn't want to confuse people. And then now, I don't think that there has been significant public resources devoted to this. And, I'm personally running myself, so is Carmen. And, we will do our best to educate people, but it's really not, in my view, candidates who are running for office's job to do that. Now, as an elected, as separate from a candidate running for office as a state senator, I am very much interested in making sure people get educated, and we're looking to do that. But remember, we're also in COVID. People are worried about us, as Dr. Duke said, worried about other issues. It's not top of mind. And so what I think is going to unfortunately happen in this case is that the people who are most active, most interested, those who have the resources and time to be super knowledgeable, because not only it's one thing to say you can vote 1 through 5, you also have to research if you're going to really be thorough and thoughtful around this. That does benefit those who are just much more engaged and much more involved, and there's some issues, some benefits that creates for those people. And so I do appreciate Sean's poll, but it's also true that is a fake poll. I mean, it would be good to see this in action, where there's some stakes on the line to get a sense of what does the exhausted voters breakdown mean, what does that look like versus who's not, and we can go from there. Look, it is what it is at this point. One thing I say, I believe that I want to win regardless, right? When I run, you believe you're the most qualified candidate, you run the win, et cetera. But it is unfortunate that there isn't as much urgency and effort publicly being made from those who have the resources. I forget which agency. It's not Board of Elections.
It's the CFB, Campaign Finance Board.
I haven't felt. I don't know if Carmen, she probably can say she has, but I have not seen significant marketing and resources going towards educating people on this race in June. I'm not sure how much went into the special election that just occurred in Queens, but to leave people to their own devices, it helps those who are just the most sophisticated voters and most engaged. And so I think that's an issue.
I'm curious to get your opinion then, that you're saying that it's a downside that voters need to be more engaged and that they need to research all the candidates. Are you suggesting that people shouldn't be doing that anyway right now? I understand that not everyone has the time to be researching every single candidate.
Yeah, I think there is a difference between those who might be fortunate enough to be, have one job, maybe very comfortable, maybe not even working at all, and you have the time to do that, versus some folks who work 2 jobs and just have different lifestyles. I believe in voter engagement, voter activation. I think there are sometimes people try to make this argument that there isn't an interest in everyone being engaged and active. But I think it's important to acknowledge that there are folks who have different life circumstances, and those who are who have less income and are most vulnerable, who right now in some cases are worried about how they're going to eat, volunteering their time to research 100 candidates. I mean, think about it. We got the mayor's candidate race with 20 candidates now. I don't even know the amount. Comptroller's got about 8 or plus. You got the borough presidents in each location. City council in some races are almost 30 people. So you do have to have, if you want to be very thoughtful and thorough about this, you do have to have the time to devote to that. And I'm not, I'm just saying that's a real issue. And so my point is that we should be figuring out how we're going to make this very easy for people to understand that we have a part of our community that doesn't operate on internet and broadband. How are they going to get educated on this? That's what I'm concerned about. So for me, the CFB, their plan to make sure that no voters are disenfranchised based upon their background and ability and what they're exposed to and what they have the resources for, some sort of confidence that that's going to occur, I believe should have been already occurring. But that's a significant thing that we should be talking about and fighting for. And that's what I emphasize.
I want to throw it to the assembly member in a moment, but Sean, it looks like you want to chime in here. I'm sure you have some insight about both special elections that have happened so far and things that we might be able to learn from them.
Yes, so I'll say we've been doing exit polling in both special elections because I think I'm a data geek. And so while we haven't released the results yet, we will after we get everything back from this last special election. We can say that overwhelmingly voters in CD24 ranked their ballots. And so meaning they voted for 2 or more candidates. That overwhelmingly voters said that the ballot was understandable.
Is that the race, Sean, is that the race that Gennaro won? Which, I'm sorry, we say CD24, I don't know what, okay, all right.
Yeah. So it's a race that didn't even go into rounds, but we found that voters did rank, and we'll be running that tabulation once the data is available and releasing that to the public. As far as education goes, we've kind of used these special elections as the model. We've done not only just Zoom trainings, we've done direct mail to candidates or direct mail to voters, reaching around 20,000 households in each special district. Our team, we have organizers who are on the ground and working with community organizations. Actually, as of next week, we are starting in-person, socially distanced trainings in senior homes so that those individuals are able to find out how ranked choice voting works. We have all of our materials available in 13 different languages, including large print, which is being included in all of the food packages and boxes and bags from the Food Bank of New York. We have our materials in large print going out through public library systems and their books by mail. And so, I think often we hear folks say education is not happening, but it is. The other reality is we're 4 months out from an election. Voters really, with everything going on, are not paying attention to the election quite yet. And so that's why we've been focused on training the trainer, making sure that the people that we reach can then reach other folks, because no entity is going to be able to reach all 4.5 million voters in the city. And lastly, I'll say education is kind of a 3-legged stool. It means that government has to do education, that civic organizations and nonprofits have to do education, which we're stepping up to do. But also, candidates have to do education. I have a rule at home. I'm from the Bay Area of California, where we've had ranked choice voting for a decade, that if a candidate isn't talking to me, isn't doing education to me, I don't know if they'll do this. I take a candidate as what they do on the campaign trail as what they'll do in office. And so I think it's important to show the community that you're providing education and resources just as you would in office.
And that is actually the thing what I wanted to throw to the Assemblywoman, since you are also running for office. I was curious about where you see yourself coming into education as a candidate specifically, but also as a lawmaker.
Thank you for the question. Well, first, I just wanted to make a comment on the charter revision process. I want to say that that process was very cumbersome and that we tried our best to try and get the education.
Oh, never mind. I was just going to inform Hazel that she needed to mute, but I think she realized, sorry.
So we wanted to try to get the education on the charter revision itself out to the community, which was a cumbersome conversation because there was a lot in that charter revision. Right, so people weren't just voting on ranked choice voting; they were voting on a number of different measures. And we know that 75% of the people kind of voted in favor of ranked choice voting. So I also had concerns about the fact that not everyone was able to be as engaged in the process of voting for ranked choice voting. That being said, I do agree with Sean that candidates have a responsibility to educate our community, that this is the law of the land and that we have to kind of move it forward. I think that as a legislator in Albany, we've been focusing a lot on reform, right? And I see this as a leg of reform. I think that we've been focusing on early voting, making sure that people have the ability to switch parties, the ability to register to vote more readily, and to be more civically engaged in their own communities. And these are good things. But the resources do need to be put in place in order to make sure that it's coming into the ground. For example, in my own community, I just started having the conversations about ranked choice voting in my own race. And a lot of people say ranked choice voting, but I only want to vote for you, right? And although there isn't a penalty for only voting for me, of course, they feel guilty because they feel like they're not doing it correctly. So I think the messaging around how we explain that they're able to just vote for one person if they want to, and what are the consequences if they only vote for one person, what does that mean for the rest of the process, is part of the education that we're trying to do in our community. I will also say that language access is important in every level of government. And that's something that even in my office, you know, we try our very best to translate all the information that is coming out of our offices into Spanish, because that's the next major language in the district. So making sure that these panels are happening in Spanish, making sure that people are able to ask questions and feel engaged in that question and answer process is something that I think we need to do more of. And I also say that what I found in my race is that if people don't know any of the candidates, and I say, I'm Carmen, this is what I've done, will you consider me? They'll say, yeah, of course. And I'll say, you know, there's ranked choice voting. And then they'll ask, what does that mean? And I'll explain what ranked choice voting is. And then they'll ask me to educate them on the other candidates, which is kind of like, I say, well, you know, you should go to their websites. These are their names. You should look them up, right? But it also poses a training question for our campaigns, which is something that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. How do we train our campaigns to shift people's thinking of, you can tell them about the other candidates that are running in our races, right? So it also takes a culture shift, which is burdensome when you're quickly trying to, you know, in the era of COVID, pick up petitions, you know, get your volunteers onto virtual phone banking sessions. I agree with Senator Benjamin that our communities are not equipped, and we've seen this in the education system. Broadband access is not something that is readily available in many communities, and especially in the older population, the more elderly population, which are the stable base of voters in many communities, in getting them engaged in that process virtually. So I definitely am enlightened to hear that we're looking at people who have disabilities, like people who have visual disabilities. We should also be thinking about those that are hard of hearing, that are physically impaired. How do they have access to the ballots and to poll sites is also an issue that is very prevalent in our community. So this is a whole package of empowerment that we have to put forth to our community. And they are suffering right now. I agree with Hazel Dukes on that point. Many of the times when I try to engage on ranked choice voting, people are telling me about their unemployment benefits that haven't come in. And they're kind of like, you know, passing over the explanation on ranked choice voting, and more want to know what we're going to do to immediately impact their lives.
I'm not sure, Sean, you've unmuted. I'm not sure if you want to jump in.
Yes. I would just say I definitely think candidate education is key. We as Rank the Vote NYC have been doing candidate education seminars and boot camps for over a year now, and have had almost 200 campaigns come through that training. It's important that candidates know how to talk to voters about ranked choice voting, but also know how to campaign under ranked choice voting, because that's when you win.
I want to, Alan, but I'll let you, Senator, just very
really
briefly.
quick, and I apologize, Alan, just because I ran in a special election. That's how I won my race. And in that race, the Board of Elections was not required to alert the voter base that there was a special election. So I'm calling voters saying there's a special election, here's the date, same kind of process, educating people and asking them to vote for me. And people are saying, wait a second, well, the Board of Elections hasn't sent me anything. I don't think there's an election happening. I'm not opposed to what Sean is saying, but I do think it's important to note it's a very different thing from the campaign finance board that does not have a stake in the race, particularly for people who are always concerned, might be concerned about, people calling them special interest, et cetera. It is without question, in my view, the campaign finance board's job to make sure that people are alerted. Now, is it important for candidates to know the rules and explain the rules to voters? Sure, but most candidates are, I love Carmen, most candidates are not going to be in the business of educating voters about a process beyond themselves. I mean, it's just not a realistic thing. I mean, it feels good, it sounds good, but in reality, that's not what people are going to do. So if we want this system to work, I strongly believe that yes, candidates, I will definitely, without question, make sure to let people know. But we have to, civic groups, CFB, who actually is supposed to have resources for this. That's where I believe the majority of the education has happened, because those are voices that the voters would find most credible because they don't have skin in the actual election.
Well, I want to jump to Alan. I want to apologize first. We've been talking for a while and you haven't had a chance to jump in. But I am curious because I imagine that political clubs like yours would be a good place for the kind of civically engaged people who tend to come out to primaries can start to learn about, these changes. I'm curious, among your own membership, like what you've been hearing about ranked choice voting and just, the general feel among some of your members.
First, I want to thank everybody for this discussion and for being part of it. And I go back with Hazel Dukes to the early 70s. We've been involved in hundreds, if not, many, many hundreds of campaigns together. As I said, going back to about 1970, I voted in 53 general elections. Hazel and I think, hold the most votes in this panel. And, I go back to when in the early 70s, they instituted the runoff, and where if someone didn't get to 50% or 40%, then you had an automatic runoff. You had to come back to vote in a runoff. And we felt, those of us on the left believed that was instituted to stop somebody of color from becoming mayor or whatever office with 26% of the vote, and it kept the white power structure in office. So we always look at why what's happening is happening and why what is being proposed. Where I do disagree with Hazel is not on substance necessarily, but on the fact that the voters voted. And to postpone would be very similar to what happened with term limits and giving Bloomberg a third term. We overturned the rule of the voters. And most of us felt that was inappropriate and not the right thing to do to the people who voted. Whether or not people actually turned over the ballot and voted for ranked voting is another question, but the numbers came out where it passed, and I don't think we could second guess the voters at this point in time. So whether or not we approve of it, to me is not that relevant. I also want to say, well, when I talk to other leaders within the LGBTQ leaders in the Democratic Party, what I'm being told basically is, look, we're going to choose who we're supporting, and we're going to go out for that candidate. And like always, we're going to have our endorsed candidate, and that's what our job is, to get that endorsed candidate the votes. I don't think most people right now would know who they're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm not even sure I know who my 1 is in many of the cases. Nevertheless, who my 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 are. Probably know who my 5 is, but maybe not my others. And I think there's going to be a lot. First of all, there's going to be a lot of people out there that are not attached to social media, that are elderly, that are homebound, and do not speak English as a first language, and are really not part of the process, and are not going to be able to be reached. No matter what we do, there's going to be a large segment or a significant segment of people that are not going to be able to be reached on what is happening. For those of us who have been voting a certain way for decades, change is change. Some people welcome it, and some people say, why? But, you know, the presidential race got everybody's attention in New York. But it was simple. It was good against evil, and we knew what we had to do. That's not what we have here. We got various candidates for each, for controller, for mayor, who are good people, and people are undecided, and they may be undecided until the day they go into the voting booth of who they're actually going to push the lever, no, who they're going to push the pencil for. And we're asking them to not only do that, but to do the rating. And it is a bit confusing when we're in the middle of a pandemic. And as Hazel repeated over again, there are other concerns. So I think we just have to do the best with what we have in front of us. We have to acknowledge that we're not going to be able to reach the vast number of people that we want to reach, in part because of the pandemic, in part because of language, in part because of people being homebound, and in part because people who are on social media and in all these chat rooms and everything, we know what's going on. But other people that are taking care of their families and their sick ones and all, this is all on the side. So, you know, we have what we have. And another thing I want to say, as far as bringing the vote out to ensure that we have more minority representation through ranked voting, that remains to be seen. We're a unique city. We're not Oakland, California. We're not Chicago. We have to see what this actually does. And I'm sure that there will be studies to see whether or not this is helping disenfranchised communities. All our communities, whether it's people of color, Latino community, the women, LGBT, we have more candidates running now than we've ever had before. I don't know how that's going to affect us in ranked voting in the council races or in any of the other races. That remains to be seen. And there's one other point I wanted to make. Well, I forget what it is at the moment, but this is an experiment. And we're going to have to see, you know, where it winds up. Our job is to get everybody out there, to educate people about it. And there will be a lot of people that will feel that they're not doing their job by going in to only vote for one person. And if you're going to vote, you want to do your job correctly. And to figure out how to do it correctly is a mental chore. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for all of that. I think that those are all excellent points. And I think that even with the best education, as you said, this is hardly the first time that we've had a major change to how elections are run. I know I've spoken with people who tell me that they know voters who still are not, you know, overly familiar. They're still used to the lever system. They never really adjusted to the pencil and paper and the scanners that we use now. And it seems like it may be an unfortunate reality that with any change, there might be some people who are left behind, but obviously we want to reach as many people as we can. And so I just kind of want to open it back up again to talk about, you know, best practices for how to reach these communities that might be hard to reach, who might not have as much time, who don't have access to the internet, who, you know, just don't have the same kind of resources or aren't quite paying attention yet, perhaps, but still want to be educated about what's happening. So I think I want to just kind of open that back up and just, so we can maybe talk a little bit about what you each would like to be seeing in terms of education from the city and from the various community groups, civic groups, religious groups that are also doing this outreach themselves.
Yeah, I just want to say that I want to start off where Alan left off. Alan made a great point saying that this is an experiment. And I think if we look at it in that frame, I think that helps. I think, unfortunately, right now, it's almost like the people who are for it at all costs don't want to hear anything else besides it's going to work, and every data point goes into that argument, and those who are against it have another opinion. I think that what we need to do is the way we do everything else. Different communities receive information differently. We can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. The way that you want to educate in Central Harlem is not the same way you might want to educate in Washington Heights, and et cetera. And so I think, the religious institutions clearly, social media in certain places makes a lot of sense. Phone calls make sense just to kind of get people engaged, but there are a number of community centers, wherever the bodies go, senior centers. I mean, we know where the people are now. Unfortunately, we're in a pandemic, so getting to people is a little more complicated. But I want to just make one point, because Sean earlier made the point that in the Gennaro race, that the majority of people ranked multiple candidates. It's also true that in the Gennaro race, that he represents Kew Gardens, Briarwood, Hillcrest. That's not necessarily the most representative neighborhoods in the city. So I think, we should look at what happened there. We should look at what happened in this Queens race. We should look at what's happening in the Bronx race. I think that race is in March. I think the Richie Torres seat in particular, I know the seat. We should look at what's happening in these places. Obviously, do our best, look what's happening in these places, and then learn from that. And it's an iterative process. So I really strongly think we shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all approach. But I do believe that the idea that this should be on the candidates primarily, and I'm not sure if that was what was being said, I want to make sure I push back heavily against that. I think the Campaign Finance Board and whatever role the Board of Elections is supposed to play, I'm hearing it's CFB, they have to take the major lead here. Everyone should participate, but I don't want a situation where there's very little resources that come from the CFB officially, and then, but the candidates were supposed to do it, and then people aren't educated, and then we have a problem. So I just want to really hone in on that, because this is too important. There's too much at stake to not make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
I'm going to go to the Assembly member only because she unmuted before you, Sean. So, and it looks like she has something she wants to add as well. So
yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what Brian said. I wholeheartedly agree that the candidates can't do all the education ourselves. First of all, our races are capped, right? We have spending caps. And so we have to use the resources that are available to us in a mechanism that allows us to get our messages out to each home, right? Even though there are creative ways to talk about ranked choice voting within that, it's about prioritizing how you get the word out. So I think that it's like a three-legged stool, right? It's government, it's the city agency, and it's the candidates, not all of it falling on the candidates. I did want to have 2 points on best practices that I think could be better utilized. Ethnic media needs to be better utilized. For example, I am of Dominican descent, and we have a ton of bloggers, a ton of food critics, a ton of people that do really niche social media, radio, television, newspaper reporting. These people are the people that people go to kind of forget about COVID-19 and everything else that is happening in the world. We need to insert this conversation into those touch points. So that is one area where I would love to see more resources dedicated. I also think that we need boots on the ground. Eric Adams, I think, mentioned the census outreach. Washington Heights, the community that I represent, has for, I think, the last 2 cycles kind of led in responses. That wasn't a coincidence. That's because there was a concerted effort to have boots on the ground, plus have the clergy, the nonprofit sector, the community organizers all come together to ensure that our community responded to the census in Manhattan. So I think that we need to replicate some of those efforts that we know that have worked already in order to do this. And yes, there's going to be, hiccups and flaws and things that we could all do better, and we'll learn. The uncomfortableness about the experiment is that I'm on the ballot, and I don't want to experiment with the future of the city council and the makeup of the city council. I'm a woman. We know that the city council has traditionally not had women representatives in office, and so we want to make sure that those diversity points are hit, that seats that have been traditionally African American seats and Asian American seats and Latino seats remain that way, because representation matters. And so as long as we're able to form coalitions that continue to enfranchise voter and not exclude them from processes, those are the type of reforms that I want to continue to support and see.
Sean, was there something you wanted to add?
I would just say I totally agree, and the assembly member stole my talking point, but definitely education is a three-legged stool, and you have to, all three legs of that stool are equally responsible for doing voter education. We also know that generally as a voter, the first candidate that talks to them about ranked choice voting is the candidate that they mark as their number one. So there's an incentive for candidates to also be talking to voters and educating voters on ranked choice voting. Again, I mentioned that we had exit polling. We saw that 60% of voters in Council District 24 ranked 2 or more people on their ballot. But we are looking at all of the special elections and collecting that data. And we'll be doing 2 reports, one for Queens and one for the Queens special elections and one for the Bronx special elections. And then lastly, I think best practices for education. I'm happy to see that the CFB is going to be doing television commercials, and they've already started in the districts that are having special elections doing advertising and op-eds in ethnic media. I know that's going to be happening citywide. We have partners that we're providing dollars and resources to, like Dominicanos, like NAACP branches across the city, United Neighborhood Houses, Mothers on the Move, a bunch of organizations that have deep and wide roots into the community, so that it's not just us doing the education. We have organizers on the ground. Yes, they're starting to do in-person trainings in senior communities. But really it's those long established organizations that are trusted messengers that have that wide and deep reach that we all need to utilize.
And, I guess any final thoughts, Alan, because we do have to wrap up very shortly, and I want to spend at least one more minute answering a couple of the last technical questions.
2 points. For the first time, we're actually going to be having candidates teaming up as units. I spoke to a woman running for council in the Bronx yesterday, and 2 of the women candidates are ranking each other as 1 and 2 to stop the machine candidate. And in Brooklyn, there's another race where the 2 candidates are doing the same thing to stop an insurgent from coming in. We've never really seen that before. And I'll tell you something that I'm going to miss. Everybody else says, oh, there'll be less rancor and there'll be less negativity. I'm going to miss the Bella Abzugs and Mario Cuomo screaming at each other on Gabe Pressman the night before everybody goes to vote. I'm going to miss the Ed Koch. I never miss Ed Koch, but I'm going to miss the Ed Koches and Mario Cuomo's duking it out over signs on the night before on people go out to vote. And some of that rancors and what New York has been all about for decades and decades and decades. Now we're going to be polite. Okay.
Well, it's certainly some of the drama might go away, but I'm sure not all of the drama. This is still New York City that we're talking about. We do need to wrap up in a minute. I just wanted to close off again, just answering a couple more of the technical questions that I've seen pop up. Just a couple of notes. For example, it'll take about 2.5 weeks after votes are cast to get the final results in, for anyone who's curious. Unfortunately, you have to wait for every single absentee ballot and military ballot to come in before the counting process can begin, the elimination process and redistribution. So it will take a little bit longer. Again, it is only New York City special and primary elections, not state and not federal. Counting continues until there are 2 candidates left. As soon as someone hits 50+1, they will be the winner, but their percentage will presumably go higher as the counting continues, just to show a greater representation of all the votes that are cast. And if you only vote for one person, again, that doesn't mean that your vote doesn't count. It only counts once, as opposed to someone who ranks 5 times, means that their vote could potentially count all for 5 times in this race. And I realize I don't think we've ever mentioned you can rank up to 5 candidates, not 10, not 20, not you can't rank all of them in the case of the New York City mayor's race. You can rank up to 5. And Sean, just any last words about any of these technical aspects for our attendees who might have a couple of questions?
Sure. Just really quickly, the counting process takes about the same as it always has. In the June primary, it will simply be hitting the button on a keyboard. So the counting process, the tabulation process takes about 30 seconds. It doesn't add any time to the amount of time that it will take in the June election for votes to be reported.
And just in what that means is what you see on election night is all unofficial results anyway. The certification happens several weeks later. It's just normally you can tell who wins on election night. This time around, you might not be able to. So that's where the wait comes from. But the actual tabulation, as Sean said, does not take very much or any extra time at all. It's, as he said, just a click on a computer. And with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to say thank all of our panelists for coming in and chatting with us. There are some very valid concerns, some grave concerns, and very important concerns that were raised that certainly the city and other groups that are involved in education should be sure to take into consideration to make sure that there is not disenfranchisement and that as many people as possible are able to exercise their vote to the best of their ability. So thank you for all of our panelists again. This is a great discussion, and I hope that it was helpful for everyone who tuned in. And I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Zach, to take us out.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I'll clap here from my own home in lieu of an audience applause for our great panelists. Great discussion, obviously a very important topic for anyone that cares about what's going on in New York City and state. So let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe to our newsletter, comes out every morning, compiled by Rebecca, by the way. You can sign up at City and State NY, like NewYork.com, or sign up for my newsletter, get the latest on COVID every afternoon at 2 p.m. You can sign up same place, cityandstateny.com. And of course, join us for some of our upcoming events. Friday, February 26th, we got the economic benefits of 5G, sponsored by Crown Castle. Registration is free and can be found in the chat. Please also join us for our first installment of our State Legislative Forum, Supportive Services for an Aging Population, sponsored by the great people at AARP New York on Friday, March 5th. And then, of course, drum roll, the 4th installment of our Ranked Choice Voting Forum, this time on Staten Island, the not-so-forgotten borough, with additional mayoral candidate interviews on Thursday, March 11th. Thanks again to all of our panelists, Rebecca for moderating the discussion, and our great sponsor, Spectrum. I'm Zach Williams, staff reporter at City and State. Catch you next time.